Hey, I'm JC, the president of Monash Association of Coding, and today I'll be going over our first workshop in our web development series where we'll help you to build your own personal portfolio website. Today, we'll be focusing on specifically Git and HTML. So the agenda for today is we have quite a few things we'll do. We'll go over a bit of an introduction about the club, install some tools, learn more about Git at the beginning, and then also make your first HTML file. And lastly, we'll do our final Git push and also handle recruitment and also discuss resources. A bit about Mac. So we're one of the largest coding clubs here at Monash University, and we've been running ever since 2019. For 2024, we have 4 key goals in particular. The first is to provide essential skills to our members to help them reach their personal and professional goals. Number 2, to conduct impactful workshops such as this one to both bolster your soft and technical development. And number 3, to provide you with the best opportunities such as internships, programs, and grad roles to help you to find a job. And lastly, number 4, is to foster a community of like-minded individuals. So if you are interested in coding or wanting to develop yourself more technically, or want to develop yourself in the tech space, definitely Mac is the place for you. So really quickly, a bit about myself. So I'm JC. I'm in my 5th year at Monash Uni, but my 3rd year of computer science. And yeah, currently I'm on my IBL internship and currently working under customer insights at Origin Energy. Another thing about me, I also run my own tuition business on the side and recently partook in a startup program called Fast Track, and we ended up winning $5,000 to continue to develop our learning platform, which will help people to accelerate their learning. And yeah, if you want to find out more, feel free to scan that QR code. It has a link to all my socials, and I do also make a couple other personal videos as well about how I'm doing with things and how my life is progressing, and even just giving tips to help you guys to improve as well. So Daniel Ding is also one of the co-hosts for today, but for the recording, he won't be here. It will just be myself, but on the day of the workshop, he did help to run the Git side of things. And he's the competitions director at Mac, a support analyst at Coles, and is also studying a Bachelor of Software Engineering and Commerce, and he's also in his 5th year. So I've known Daniel for a couple years now. Yeah, so that's a bit about us. Stay tuned for the rest of it. So what is the vision from these workshops? Well, the goal is to teach students to build their own personal websites over the course of the next 12 weeks. Thinking back on when I was first year, I only really learned Python, and it never really taught you web development well. And what I wanted to do this year was to teach students to make their own personal website where they can put all their projects, show off that they know some web development skills to help you stand out a bit more from the rest of the crowd. Okay, so the goal for today is you'll actually be making just a simple plain HTML file that will just outline some core sections which you want to use in the future websites. By the end of it, we want to be like Hui. Hui was our previous design director, and he's goated. His website is so clean, and I'll show you right now. Just a bit about him. He's a freelance web developer, and yeah, initially he studied business but was just self-teaching himself, and the stuff that he's made is amazing. I would definitely recommend checking out his YouTube channel where he talks all about his self-learning journey as well as how he gets better at design.
So I was just binging YouTube and I stumbled.
This workshop series has been broken down into 3 key sections. We have the core technologies, portfolio site, and enhancements. The first 4 weeks will focus on learning the key languages and technology that go behind a website. Next, we'll cover React, and we'll be building out different components of your site and also providing you with different options for you to copy down during this session. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll be able to come up with your own site with a couple different templated stuff from us. And hopefully if you expand on it, it will be more custom towards you. And then lastly, we'll do some enhancements. So we'll actually deploy the website. We'll maybe add some animations with Framer Motion. And we're still not sure if we'll run some stuff in week 11 and 12. We might even rebuild the site in another framework. It will depend on how everyone's feeling by that time. And also given that that's closer to exam period, we might not run stuff then. So just as a heads up, we're here to help you, and we have a couple of our officers and execs who are happy to help. So I've listed out a whole bunch of different people. Some of them will be coming to the workshops throughout the weeks. And I'd recommend joining our Discord server, where we've made a new web dev questions chat where you can just ask questions there, and you'll be able to get some help from us as well. There's also a web dev role that I would recommend you to get. So under the role assignment, if you just react to the field of study role to get web dev, then we'll stop pinging you each week about our updates with the videos, any notes we might have, or anything of that sort. So the first things first, we want to get GitHub. So if you can go to github.com/signup, I'd recommend doing this using your student email. So yeah, quickly do that, and once you finish that, come back to the video. Now time for the GitHub Student Developer Pack. This is a very important thing that you need to get, as it will give you access to some free domain names. It will give you access to GitHub Copilot, which is something we'll use later on, GitHub Pages, which is another way for us to host our site, and also a lot of other freebies that I can't remember off the top of my head. But we will be using some of the tools from here, so I would recommend getting it. Just go to education.github.com/pack. From memory, in the workshop, quite a lot of people have digital student IDs. So Will has actually sent out a message in our Mac server telling everyone about alternatives to get the pack. So make sure to just check out that message that he sent and to upload the required documents, and you should be good to go with that pack. I'd say we probably need this properly. I'd say we need the pack by week 3 of the workshops, so try to get it before then. Installation. So instead of me trying to explain everything, I've actually listed out a whole bunch of videos for the different platforms for how you can install different things. So I'd recommend checking out those videos in the description, and that will help you a lot to save some time. So yep, make sure you're installing VS Code, as that's the IDE or code editor of our choice. Git for Windows if you're using Windows, as well as just Git from the Git site. So make sure you have those 2 things. And yeah, once you've installed those, come back to this video and we'll keep going forward. So time for Git. What is Git? This is what allows us to collaboratively work together with others when coding. So think of it like Google Docs, but for code. And it's quite powerful as it allows us to revert back to previous iterations of our code. It also allows you to work across different devices, as well as work across different teams. So you could have maybe 10 people working on the same code base. The only difference is you might have to merge or combine the code later. How does it work? What happens is you can store your code both locally on your machine and via a remote repository. And the 2 commands which occur. So if you ever want to take the code that you have on one machine and send it to the remote repository, you would do something called a git push. And then if you wanted to get the code from a remote repository and open it up on another computer, you'd use git pull or git clone. And yeah, we'll go into more details about that soon. So how do we use it? For the sake of the next couple of weeks, we're going to make it super simple for you and just use VS Code's Git inbuilt Git functions. You can also use like the command line interface and like Git bash and like terminal, but I'd say that's a bit more advanced, and we probably won't go into it too much, purely because we want this workshop series to be catered towards those who are either first-time coders or who want to just learn web development for the first time. We might touch on Git Kraken in the future, so this is a way to visualize all the different Git requests that you're making in order to work more collaboratively, and to also visualize things a bit better from just talking to the command line. Okay, time to start your first GitHub repo. So once you have logged in back on GitHub, you can pull it up, and from there you want to click on this new button here, and that will allow you to make a new repository. So what you want to do is you want to create a repository name. This can be anything that you want. I might just call it web dev or personal website site. Yep. And I recommend adding a README file, as This will help us to write a description for our project. And once that's done, we want you to press Create Repository. And yeah, now that you've made your first repository, this is what we'll be using later to make your own site. Okay, so the next steps. We want to go back to our repository, and from there we want to click on this down arrow in order to bring up this menu and click HTTPS, and we want to copy this URL to our clipboard. From there, we want to pull up VS Code, and under source control, which is this button here, you can click clone repository, and from there you can copy the link that you just made. From here, you need to choose a file or folder that you want to save it in. And I recommend creating a projects folder either under documents or under your desktop, just to make it simple. So I think I have a projects folder here. Yep, and let's just call it web dev. Yep, and that's where we're going to save a repository. And once that's done, you just want to open it up in your VS Code, and bam, this is now ready for us to use. What we'll be doing next is going over Git versus GitHub. So Git in particular focuses on version control. So this allows you to add stuff, commit stuff, and to make branches. GitHub, on the other hand, is a remote repository. And GitHub is not the only one. There are more like GitLab, Bitbucket, and many more. So these remote repositories allow you to clone, pull, and push. So these two work side by side in order for you to move your code and save it across multiple devices and to work with multiple people as well. From our working directory in VS Code, that allows us to store and host all the code that we have. And afterwards, right, if we use a git add command, that will move all of that code that we have into the staging area. And from that staging area, if we git commit, we're now storing all of that in our local repository. Typically, we would add a commit message, and you want to make it as concise as possible. So maybe you might say updated button or changed text layout, or you might even add version numbers as well. It's really up to you, but typically that's what happens there. And lastly, we have git push, and that pushes all the code from our local repo to the remote repository. And yeah, that's how it works, from pushing stuff from the working directory to the remote repository. But if you want to pull it to a different device, you would use the command git pull. And git pull is just made up of two separate commands, git fetch and git merge. But I'd recommend only really focusing on git pull for now. Yeah, this is what we'll be doing today to introduce you to Git and HTML. Okay, time for the HTML portion of the workshop. So what is HTML and what does it stand for? Well, it stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it also defines the structure and content of web pages. And every web page that you've ever visited has HTML files in it, as well as HTML elements. Yeah, time for some setup now. We'll install some important extensions on VS Code that will help you to develop things faster. So if we pull up VS Code, what we want to first do is click on this accounts icon here and press sign in. Once you've signed in, a Google Chrome or whatever browser pops up and will ask you to log in via GitHub, and just fill in your details. And once that is done, then it will load up your VS Code with your profile. And this allows you to just sync a lot of your extensions between your devices, so you're not always having to reinstall these extensions. Okay, now that that is done, and you can verify it here when you hover over here and it says sign out. Okay, next we want to click on this sort of grid section here, which stands for extensions, and we want to install a few key extensions. The first ones in particular is live server and VS Code icons. So around each week every couple weeks, we'll be installing new extensions to help speed up your workflow. So now with this, if we type up live server, it should appear, yep, and it's the one by Ritwik Day and has over 45 million downloads. So just click the install button and then you should be able to see a new icon here in the bottom right once it has loaded. So this icon down here that says go live. Okay, after that's installed, next we want to install VS Code icons. And the reason we want this is it's just a helpful tool that will allow you to see the different icons of the various files that we'll be working with. And yeah, this is one that you'll also just install and you can just select which icons you want. Cool. Now that that's installed, we'll go back. Now that we have the first two key useful extensions, let's now make our first HTML file. So if we go back to VS Code, and if we press either this icon here, we can make a new file. And what we want to call it is index.html. Alternatively, you can also use Control N, and then it will bring up a new page. And then if you press Control S to save, you can decide where it goes and also type in index.html, and that will also work. Yep, so just a few ways to make a new file. What I'd recommend is using this new command exclamation mark. And the reason we use this is it will basically add boilerplate for your HTML. And that just means setting up the key tags and elements that you need for an HTML file. Elements versus tags. So an element is one which encapsulates both a opening and closing tag. An opening tag is one which is surrounded by an angled brackets, as well as some text in between, whereas a closing tag starts with a / and some text. Each of these tags can also have attributes, and these are just properties which might change the tag in some way, or maybe even like allow the tag to be linked to something else and so forth. Time for the coding part where we'll actually build that single page HTML site. What this will comprise of is we'll go over some key tags and elements that we'll be using for each of the sections. Then I'll do some live coding. Then I'll leave it up for a bit and answer any questions anyone might have. And yeah, we'll rinse and repeat that until our final git push. Time for the header section. So this is the first section of our HTML site. And it includes a title element, which will display the title in the web page of the browser's title bar. And this just helps in identifying the page and is used for navigation. Next, we'll also change the icon next to that title, and that is called a favicon. And how we'll be doing that is through a link element. And within that link element, there is a rel attribute, and this attribute allows you to link. And this rel element allows you to define what it is related to. And the href attribute is one which links the path to the icon that you have. So if you want, you can upload a icon to your file and then link it and also have it be displayed in your browser. Now let's get into editing the header. So how we're going to do that is we first want to enable this go live button. So if you click on it, it will allow us to bring up a blank page for where we'll be able to see all the changes of our site. So I'm just going to split up the screen here just so it's easy to see. So yep, make sure you press that go live button, and then you should have a stop button as well as a port, and this will be used to display the site. Okay, so what we want to do here is first change up the title. Let's call it my personal website. And if you press Control S, you can see that now the title has changed, and that is something we want. Okay, next we want to use that link element that we just learned about. So if we type in link, we can now add the rel, and we want to list it as icon, as this is what allows us to change the favicon, and that's just the icon in next to the title. And yep, you want to have an href, which will basically link it to some path or some file. So in this case, the mac.svg logo was just uploaded to the same folder. So you can just drag and drop it here. And once that's done, you can link any icon of your choice. So yep, now we can see that the Mac logo is in the top right of our site. And great, that's pretty much the first part for the header. Now, what we want to cover, or what we want to do is just basically edit the title, implement the link, and change the favicon. So I'll leave this up for just a bit, but once that is done, we'll move on. For the sake of not overloading you, we're going to ignore the meta tags, just because that is something we won't really be focusing on in the future, but essentially they're used for encoding as well as displaying the HTML page. Okay, next is the navbar. And the navbar is going to be comprised of 3 key elements. The first is a div or a division, and this allows you to separate different elements into different sections. And it's used for styling elements, enhancing organization, as well as providing some structure to the web page. Next, we have this nav element, and essentially this is one which will be used for our navbar. So on each website, there's like a navigation bar with a whole bunch of links that will allow you to go to different pages or access different things. And yep, this is something we'll implement using A elements, which are just navigation links. So each of these will point to a different section on the site. So after we've implemented all the different sections, we can click on each of the different links and it will jump down to that section. So yeah, that's what we'll be implementing with the navbar now. So the goal with the navbar is to implement the nav element as well as the div element, and also to create 5 different links to the various sections of our page. So yeah, pulling back up VS Code as well as our site, what we want to do is first come up with a div. And from that div, we want to start coming up with a nav. Oops. And from that nav, we've now set up the core parts. You want the div to encapsulate all the other elements. And now from here, we want to implement an A element. And what we want to put is the text in between the 2 tags. So let's say about. And we also want to include an href. This href is like a link, and it will jump to the different sections. So in this case, the about section. So now what I want you to do is to basically copy this 5 times. So what I want you to do is to basically copy this 5 times, and after copying it 5 times, we can then change up the text. So instead of about, we'll have a portfolio section, and instead of portfolio, we'll have a skills section, and we'll also have a contact section. Yeah, we'll actually get rid of the 5th one because we won't need that for now. But another thing we need to change is the href. We don't want it to be pointing to the about section when this one is actually pointing towards the portfolio one. And this one is also pointing to skills, and this one is pointing to contact. Yep. Just as a note, the reason why all the text is like this is I've wrapped everything to appear on this screen rather than letting it like be hidden and me having to scroll horizontally. And how you can do that is if you type Alt-Z on Windows. I'm not fully sure what it is on Mac, but if you press Alt-Z, then it will wrap everything. Yeah, and essentially once you've gotten to this point, you are good to go. So yep, just copy this down and we'll move on. And you can see here that after I did save it, it did update the site. Now time for the about section. And in here, we're going to learn about the heading elements, the paragraph elements, and the image elements. So with the heading elements, it can have any level between 1 to 6, and 1 being the largest. And later on when we learn about CSS, you can start styling each of these headings in order to have like different fonts or different styles. And essentially this is used to introduce sections, and it's just a good way to showcase what content we'll be following after. So for the about section, we'll be using an h1 element. Next, we have the paragraph element, and this just includes text. So you could type in any text of your choice, and that will be displayed there. And then lastly, we also want to embed an image. And how we do that is through an image element, followed by a source attribute and a alt attribute. And essentially, source will be like the path to that image, and alt is just the alternative text that will be displayed if the image is unable to be loaded. Yeah, so how we'll be doing that is by implementing an H1, an H2, a P, and a B element. And also by writing up the different sections. Yeah, so let's get into that now. So how that will work is we'll be pulling up this new section, and what we want to do is make another div. So once again, we just wrap it in a new div. And next, we also want to add a class. You're probably wondering, what is this class for? This will just allow us to see what section this is. And we also want an ID. And the reason we're using an ID is this is what is used in the nav to jump to that section. So let's call it about. And now, whenever we click on that about button in the nav bar, it should take us to that section. Next, as for the contents, let's just implement an h2 tag and call it about. And if we press save, we can now see it on the top right. Now, let's also implement some text. So let's just say, hey, I'm JC. I study a Bachelor of Computer Science at Monash University. And I think that's good enough for a quick about section. Another tag that I'll briefly teach you is the bold tag or B tag. And essentially that allows us to bold some text in this file. Yep, if I just chuck that around this text, now we can see that Bachelor of Computer Science is bolded. So yeah, I'd say quickly write an about section. I'd say 1 to 2 sentences would be good. And once you have finished that, we'll move on to the next part, which is an image. So with images, we once again want to have a source attribute. And I'm just going to chuck in any link. So just as a note, you can even use images from the web. You just need to have the URL, and then the HTML doc will point to it. And yep, we'll also add an alt, and let's just call it headshot. Because ideally, we want to include a picture of our face, maybe even an avatar. It'll really be up to you. But for now, this is good enough. And yeah, that concludes the about section. I'd say just copy this down, and once that's over, we'll move on to the portfolio site. Or we'll move on to the portfolio section. Time for the portfolio section. And this time, we're going to learn about nested divs. So it's a div within a div, as well as a button element. And with this button, it will allow users to click on it and interact with the web page. Yeah, so how that one will work is we'll be making another div first. And from there, we'll also make another div within it. But at the top, we also want to add the class, which is portfolio. Make sure it's not capitalized, and we also want an ID, which is also portfolio. Next, we want to add a h2 tag. We'll put it above the nested div, and the reason for that is within the nested div, we'll have a different header within it. So with this, we'll have an h3 tag, and we'll call it project1. And for you, I'd recommend filling it in with whatever project you have. I'm just going to say question generator. And from there, we can now see that the header 3 tag is smaller than the header 2 tag. And yep, once that is done, we now want to insert some text. So let's say this is my first project. And from there, you can even bold some stuff if you want. You can maybe even like italicize anything. Yep, so let's just change that and bam. Now we want to add a button tag as well. So this button, it can be linked to anything. And in between the two button tags, you want to say like view my project or anything that you want. And another thing we can do is, now that we know how to link stuff using the A tag, we can do that once again. So if we wrap an A tag above the button tag, let's just move this button tag up. So you can press Alt and then the arrow key up, or you can Control X and Control V it, or like copy and paste it above. So with this A tag, you still want an href, and you can link it to anything. Let's just say google.com. Oops, we gotta add the HTTPS. Yep. So now that we have this button, if you click it, it should now take you to google.com. Yeah. So what I want you to do now as well is to just make another project, and this will just be our template for the future. So what you want to copy is the entire div, and then just paste it underneath and then change up the text. Let's say Mac Web Dev. This is my second project. And then eventually we'll be linking stuff to our actual repositories or hosted sites for each of the things. Yeah, and now this concludes the portfolio section. Now we'll look into the skills section. And what we'll be implementing here is lists. So there are two ways to have lists. We have unordered lists, which will create bullet points as the listed items. And then we have ordered lists, where things will be ordered via numbers. And how those list elements will be displayed is through an li tag. And essentially these can be nested within either unordered or ordered lists. So yep, the stuff that we're trying to build here is to just implement an ordered list and an unordered list. So what we'll be doing is listing out the soft and technical skills that you have. Now let's build out this new section. And once again, we want to build it using a div. So separate it via div and also add the class. So in this case, this one is skills, and we also have an ID which is also skills. From here, we want to have an h2 element, and let's call it skills. And now we can see it at the bottom of our page. Next, we want to have an h3, and this will just list out our technical skills. And what we can do here is we can use an ordered list. So what we'll do is just type OL, and from there we can have a whole bunch of list elements. And what you want to write is whatever technical skills you might have. For those more advanced, you might have Rust, I don't know, Golang, maybe even C. In this case, let's just put like basic stuff like HTML, and then each week you can update this with your new web dev skills. So we have CSS as well, and we also have Python, and we have JavaScript, and these are just a few. And yeah, this will now be displayed once we save. And bam, now we can see our skills. Cool. So that's an ordered list. Let's now make another H3 section. And let's call it soft skills. And very similar to ordered lists, first write the unordered list and then have some list elements. So let's say leadership. Then we might say, oops, we have leadership. Then we might have public speaking. Then we might have time management. Just list out any skills that you might have. And cool. Now we've learned how to make a skill section as well as implement lists. Yeah, that's it for the list section. Let's say copy this down and we'll move on to the contact section. And what we'll do is we'll have a form element, and this allows us to submit data to a server. However, we won't be able to make it functional until we get to like the backend component, which might be until like the later half of the semester. But essentially, this will allow us to collect information using labels and inputs, as well as a text area. So let's show you that now. A few goals that we have for this is to implement the form, input, labels, and text area. Yeah, as we said, it might not be functional until like the React section. let's start this again. And what we want to do is start off with another div. We want to also have another class. It's called contact. So we want to have an ID, which is also contact. And then we also want to implement an h2 tag. And let's call this contact as well. Next, we want a form element. And in this, we have a couple attributes such as action, which will action something. And we also have method, but we won't deal with this too much later. Next, we want some labels. And within these labels, we want to have our for, and that will just list out a name. And it has name. And we're also going to add a BR element. This is just a break element, and it will just allow you to have a line break between the sections. Next, we also want an input. And from here, we want to have a type that will list as name, text. I have an ID, which is also listed as name. And a name equals name. And also, if we add this thing called required, that will just ensure that this is needed for the page. Next, we'll add a double break element at the end. So for this form, essentially each different part is broken up into a label, followed by a input section. So as listed here, you can type in anything into this input box. Okay, next. To save some time, let's just copy the label and input twice, and let's just rename it. So now we have the email section. So we write this as email. Next, we also have the message section, which will list as message. And also, we want to change a couple other values as well. So all of this should be email. And same with the type as well. And the email is required. Next, for this bottom section, its type is message, and its ID is also message, and its name is also message. Or actually, we don't need a name for this section. Yep, that's required. And then to add some more functionality, we can add rows and columns just to make it wider. So if we press Ctrl S, we can now see the text area. Oh, whoops. This one should be labeled as text area over input. Yep, and then we'll just add the closing text area tag. And see, now it's as wide as we want it to be. So yep, these are the three sections we want for the contact page. And lastly, we can also have a input, and that will just be type, which is submit, and this will just show a button. Yep, and cool. Now all of this is linked under the form, and this will be a form that we'll use later on. Lastly, it's the footer section. And each page typically has a nav, some content in the middle, and then a footer. So we can use a footer element, which will basically talk about any information at the bottom. Sometimes it even adds info like the author, copyright notice, any other useful resources, and things like that. So the copyright notice can be denoted using this and copy sign. And that's one of these elements that we can just chuck in to our site. The goal for this is to implement the footer and copy. So yep, quickly going here, we'll make another div, and we'll make a footer element, and then we'll also write a p tag. So if we write and copy, and semicolon, 2024 JCB, where all rights reserved. Bam. Now at the bottom, we have this text as well as the copyright logo in the footer. We'll add more stuff later, such as page links and stuff like that, but we'll deal with that later on. Okay, apart from that, this is a good first site. So if you click on portfolio, you can jump to there. Same with skills, and same with even contact. So this is really good to see. That is the first part of the site. Next, let's make your first Git commit. So how we're going to do that, if we pull up VS Code and we click on source control, what we want to do first is write a message or a commit message. Let's say first website. And from there, you want to press commit. And yep, once you've committed all of that, it sends it all to the local repository as we were talking before. Next, if we commit, it will push it to main. So now that we're on my GitHub, see personal site, if we click on it, we can now view the index.html file that we have just made. Oh, and yep, that is our first Git commit for the series. So there's a whole bunch of fancy resources that you can use, such as roadmap.sh, the Odin project. I can just show you some of these, roadmap.sh. You can learn any sort of developer roadmap that you're interested in, be it front end, full stack. And this is just an open source platform that will teach you all the essentials you need for each of the different things to get into that role. We also have the Odin project, which is another good project or thing to do to learn more about web development. And they have a whole bunch of these paths and stuff like that. I'd say I used these quite a bit back in the day. I still kind of do. I'm still doing the Odin projects next pod. Yeah, I'd also recommend Dave Gray. He really taught me a lot of the theory behind HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, as well as Codecademy as well. As for tools and documents, if you're ever stuck or unsure about something, always use ChatGPT. Like literally ask, oh, what does this line of code mean? Explain it to me like I'm a child or something, and it will give you a really good explanation. We also have W3 schools. So if you're ever unsure about what the different HTML elements or tags do, you can learn more about it here. But I'd say it's probably easier to just ask ChatGPT and then it will feed it back to you, as well as maybe even examples, rather than looking it up yourself. But yeah, those are two key ways that I recommend looking at it. So yep, just save this list and you should be good to go. One last thing, if you're interested in joining our committee, we're hiring first year reps and event officers. This is actually closing this Sunday on March 10th. So yep, if you scan that QR code, you can apply and maybe even get into the committee and help out with events like this. That's it. So thank you guys so much for coming to today. And yeah, I hope to see you in the next one.